Let's tune in live into our hot podcast, Imbawula, Azishe, Imbawula.
Welcome to Imbawula, Azishe. I am Mangwane. I use she pronouns.
Hi, I am Bianca. I use she, they.
Hi everyone, my name is Merique. Pronouns he, they.
Hello everyone, my name is Kgotso Molefe, pronouns they, them, and this is
Imbawula, Azishe. This is our first episode, first season, yay. Imbawula is an intersectional queer podcast. The word Imbawula, it describes like a makeshift type of fire, traditionally around which, something like this, right? Around which people gather, share stories, have fellowship with each other, and just, share meaning and have nice times with each other. And that's exactly what we want Imbawula to be. We are a group of activists from various backgrounds, various organizations, and various perspectives. And the thing that brings us together is the fact that we are queer, and that we are Black, and we want to create a space, an Imbawula, for Black queer people, and some of the burning issues that we have when it comes to that. And so for our season 1, what we decided to focus on was the theme of Black queer joy, and I'll hand over to Merique to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, the reason why we decided to highlight Black queer joy, because often in the media, the only thing that we see is like the struggles. Like you'll see that a queer person was a victim of a hate crime, or this bill was passed to suppress us, this law was passed to suppress us. There's hardly anything shared about our joys, our laughter, our sense of community. And with this, we would like to say that even though for this podcast or for this season we are focusing on Black queer joy, we're not denying that we have struggles. We just want to highlight that we have joys, we can be joyful, we are allowed to be joyful.
Yeah, I think that the theme is so important because, like you have just highlighted, there are so many representations of queer lives or queer existence in the media that often speaks to challenges, death, and hardships. And it's hard for us, for us to actually find joy being represented in mainstream media. And so we don't talk about joy often enough in our queer communities or within the sector, within the spaces that we organize, because we're so focused on the issues that need to be addressed now and having to be resilient and having to be resistant without just creating space to be with one another and make sense and meaning together. And I think that is also very much closely linked to collective care and being in community. And so I think that this topic, this season, is important for our movements, for us to draw an inspiration and for us to remember the joyful moments, to remember the inspiring moments from our histories to our present and our future through imagining what that could look like. And us even sitting here in this space thinking about a future is in itself joy, is creating joy, because we are saying that there is a future for us to look forward to. And that in itself is magic. And for us to be part of that creation through having these conversations is something that is needed within our movements. We need to take time to rest. We need to take time to reflect, and we need to be happy in our movements and in our organizing. So I think it's important. I think also the fact that we say Black queer joy, Black, and not just queer joy, again, bringing another element to the conversation, because Black joy in itself is also negated or neglected. And so what it means for us to be comfortable in our identities and celebrate those parts and elements that make part of us. And when we talk about Blackness in our theme, we talk about Blackness as a mentality, Blackness as a way of thinking, Blackness as a consciousness in our practice, in our doing, and in our thinking, what it means for us to be Black, who is Black, whose Black matters, right? And so navigating around that part of our identity is also important. And so I think that for us to tap into this already in itself is radical.
So Bianca, I love the fact that you brought Black joy into the conversation. It takes us back during the times of apartheid, you know, when Black people were suppressed and all that. But then after we got freedom in April 1994, that is when we saw that Black people are also like everyone is just everyone. Black people can also be happy. Black people can also be can also have an impact in the society. You know, life is not only black and white. Everyone is just who they are. The same thing with queer joy. Queer people have been suppressed, hated, and all that. But then we see the happiness. We see the fact that we are represented by rainbow flag. It's just made up of joyful colors, you know.
I want to pivot off what you're saying about the way that Black people are now being seen is not just as these, I don't know, these representations of a bleak life. There's a hope for joy. So I think for me, what I want us to talk a little bit about is why we chose a podcast and essentially why we're saying we want to shift narratives and create a narrative of Black queer joy in a digital space as opposed to what joyous resistance often would have looked like in traditional or mainstream. Yes.
Okay, so when we were introducing this episode, Merique highlighted two things: activism and queer joy. So when people think of activism, they're always thinking of the fight against the struggle and fighting and all that, fighting hate crimes and everything. But we are also activists. But in this season of Imbawula, we are bringing queer joy. We are fighting for people to see the queer joy. We are fighting for visibility to show people the other side of the grass, that there is joy. It's not just discrimination and tears and everything. There is also joy in being queer, as also as it is with being just a normal human being. I define joy as never mind, kind of that part.
But also, how do you define joy? How do you define joy?
Joy is a state of mind. Joy for me is like recognizing my blessings, and how I define blessings is just things that I contribute to growth of not just me, of the world. So us sitting here, like being afforded opportunity, like we folk queer people out of how many people in South Africa that got the opportunity to actually sit here and have our voices heard in this like very intersectional group that we are at. So this is a joy, like a joyous moment for me. That's
I like that. I love that.
I like that too.
Okay, so for me, joy is I will put joy as the feeling I get when I get the delivery notification. Your order is in the gate. You feel like there's that aha moment that you get, and that is what joy is for me.
Can I just say something? I think the reason why we as those will also struggle to speak about Black queer joy is because we're not like excluding ourselves from the discussion. We also need to like consciously think of the fact that there is such a thing as Black queer joy, because our upbringing has kind of like shaped us in a way like that we don't even recognize or connect with Black queer joy. Because what is joy anyway? Like for you as a queer person, because you were told your entire life that you are like your existence is wrong. You're not allowed to be happy because you will be punished whenever, now and later. So I think that's why both of us are struggling to actually define joy. So this is also very introspective. I'll ask Bianca before we answer your question to just explain the process, because how did all of like the different queer people that you will get to meet actually come together? Was it by chance that we meet at a bar? And just like our history, before we actually go on, because I think that's an important thing to discuss, because you will meet various characters in this group. We are strong-minded. Some of us are freaks. I identify as such. So yeah, like, can we just like jump like back to the beginning to speak about that? And also, I wanted to, not that this is an interview, I just wanted to know what your thought process in deciding who you will choose to be a part of this cohort. And yeah, speak a little about your work that you do at the organization that helped form Imbawula.
As the mother hen of Imbawula.
Yes.
No, mother hen. Okay, my little chicklet. So, how this vision started was in 2020, towards the end of 2021 and for most of 2022, a group of organizations were invited to host a LGBTQI program on a community radio station called Push Radio, and the program was called Rainbow Table. And sitting at the Rainbow Table was Triangle Project, PASOP, Gender Dynamics, SWEAT, and other organizations within the sector. And we put together a 2-hour program, and as soon as the funding ended, the radio program ended. And for me, it was thinking around one, what it meant for LGBTQI activists to have a space in mainstream media to control their own imaginations and produce their own knowledge, to what it also means for us in terms of movement building or movement strengthening, to be able to have an accessible body of knowledge for activists to tap into. And 3, also being able to connect our stories beyond physical borders, for it to travel on digital platforms and reach different parts of the world, strengthening our solidarity. So with all of these 3 things, with these 3 main things, and also the thinking of how technology and art has always been part of our organizing and movement building strategies. If we look at the history of our activism and liberation movements during anti-apartheid time, even art and technology has always been part of our tactics. If we look at Radio Freedom that was created, if we looked at community arts projects that was leading protest work and anti-apartheid demonstrations using art and technology as part of our advocacy tactics, right? And so what does that mean in today's age? How do we draw on these techniques which have always existed to create something that feels like our time, and something that we are able to connect with? And so one of the thoughts was podcast, because it was so easy. All you needed was to record sound, and there you go. You pop it onto the internet, and your voice travels everywhere. It was quick for us to think of, and everyone can be part of it. And so it's like, yes, this is the it. We are doing podcasts. And so putting out a call then was the next step to attracting the right kind of people who are willing to do the work. And so we did a call on social media inviting all activists who are firstly who identify as youth, who identify as LGBTQI persons or queer, and who has a keen interest in digital or technological interventions to support their current advocacy work and also to strengthen the communication. And there were many responses, but we only had space for 15. And so a lot of it was looking at location, a lot of it was looking at the support people had written behind or in the application. And so we got a core group and invited people. And one of the first things that we did as part of the training, which was a 7-month-long training process, was first understanding our context. What is our current political context? What is our landscape? And what does that mean for the digital landscape? And so going through the history of our activism, the history of our blackness, and the history of our queerness, and understanding that in order for us to understand our current context. And that was done through a 3-day political education training where we touched on Soji-esque, where we touched on history, and also a little bit of dreaming, right? What are the systems that need to change? What are the systems that need to go? Following that, the next step that was important was, what is the story that we want to tell? What are we saying? And in exploring that, understanding and realizing how the importance of narratives, right? And how narratives have so much influence over society and community and their thinking, because we have been told certain things about a certain group of people. We carry certain prejudices, we carry certain beliefs because of stories that have been shared in the media, because of stories that have been shared in schools, because of stories that are shared in churches and places of worship. A narrative then is created. And a narrative is different stories that inform one big thinking or belief about a certain group. And so what it would mean for us to be able to shift those narratives that often paint queer bodies in a negative light, for us to be able to tell our own stories from an authentic point of view. And so that component of narrative framing was very important for us to understand what we need to shift within ourselves and what we need to shift in the way that people see us, right? And so that part of the process was a lot of digging into ourselves. I don't know how I think that for everyone it's a different experience, but just for me to be sitting in that space meant for me to go into myself and to go back to my memory box to remember, what stories did I hear about queer people growing up? What was I told? What is the thinking in my household? And what did I read in the newspapers? And to come to the realization that even me, I have been sitting with certain internal feelings of homophobia because of these narratives, that because of these stories that I've been told, and that influenced this narrative that I had about my own existence. And so having that space was really a moment of radical truth telling, because we were then able to sort of purge ourselves from those stories and create new stories, and also understand that nothing is black and white, and there are so many complexities in our identities. And how do we make space for all of that to create one beautiful picture that is easily digestible to the rest of the world? And podcast makes stories, knowledge digestible, because you plug it in and you are listening, and you just need to sit down and allow for it. Then you can play in the background and it can play while you're driving, before you go to bed. It's mobile, and so that was sort of part of the narrative framing process and soft learning. Then going into sort of more of the hard and technical skills around, okay, what kind of software do we use? What kind of editing tools do we use? How do we put this out there? Which is also important because it speaks to the conversation around access, right? Especially when you're thinking about software, because is it paid software? Who has the money? Someone needs to download this. Who has the data? Is the network available? Also understanding geographical location and how this also influences our level of accessibility. And so I think for this program, that in itself, the accessibility part is going to be an ongoing conversation because it will continuously shape the way in which we produce and distribute content and think around the how this gets shared, right? Because we don't have all the answers now. But I think that since we are in it, we can always develop and learn and add on to and take away to find ways that Imbawula doesn't stay in a pool of privileged listeners or privileged audience that has the privilege of access to technology and technology-based tools. And also understand that it's a class issue when we talk about digital space, right? Because we also talk about language. Because if we look at the language that is dominant on the digital space, it's English and a few other languages, but mostly English, right? And the kind of English that is used as well. And so, whose technology is it too? And who's left out? And I think COVID also taught us many of those big lessons around who actually gets left out when we talk about tech. But this podcast and the thinking around the podcast was for us to find ways, tech and creative ways, in which we are able to enter a new space, a public space, and raise our visibility within that space, and also to be able to influence web-based communities, right? So that we are able to not only reach those of us who are here in South Africa and knows what load shedding is, but to be able to influence a greater community that is web-based so that people in Atlanta and Oklahoma know, hey, in South Africa, did you know folks are going through load shedding? What the actual is, right? So for our experiences to travel in this realm and figuring ways in which we navigate this realm, I think was also an important factor in this process. And so that was sort of the thinking around the 7 month training program. I mean, my role at Triangle Project is tech-based and activist-based and wellness-based. I think those are the three key elements of my role. And so always finding ways in which we can use these elements to strengthen our movements and amplify our work, to be able to build bigger movements, and also connect with bigger movements. Yeah, so that is how Imbawula was born. The group then took the identity completely onto themselves, and I think that it's Imbawula burns as a podcast, yes, but Imbawula burns as so much more than a podcast. Imbawula burns as a movement, one that brings us back to ourselves and back to the importance of our unique identities and the ways in which we celebrate those identities and see ourselves within ourselves and one another. And so I love this image of the fire that is always burning, because it's not only meant to bring us together through our hardships and through our joys, but it's also meant to inspire us that keep this fire of us burning, to inspire movements and to inspire different ways of thinking and imagining beyond our 10-year dream. What do we think Black Queer Joy looks like in 100 years? Because then we are also saying that we believe we will grow old. We right now, for LGBTQI plus persons to grow, to be older than 50 is a dream in itself, right? Because of the current realities and crime against our bodies. I read the statistics that a trans woman doesn't live for, seldomly reaches the age of 40 even. So for this fire to be more than sitting and telling stories, for it to inspire and for it to burn down systems that do not work for us, and create new space and new ideas. So I completely love that metaphor, or the idea of that fire, that makeshift fire. And also the fact that it's mobile, that you can put up on Imbawula anywhere, and anyone can be part of it. So if you are running a group in Neisner and you feel like you want to share the story, let's have an Imbawula in your community and let's sit around the fire and bring up these burning issues. Yeah, I think that was what's it now.
Okay, now just like coming back to the disclaimer I wanted to make before, because we needed that. So obviously now, after the three of us, we've heard this speech 100 times throughout the journey, and obviously like there was a lot of pressure because it's just a lot of pressure on us, and that's why I think we took so long to actually like put something together, because we don't want to disappoint anyone. We don't want to fuck up. But I think the last like few months before our launch, like we just said like if we fuck up, we're gonna fuck up big. And we're not expected to be perfect. There's a lot of things that Bianca has said over the training that stuck with me. But was when I was like, oh, we need this equipment, like all the fancy equipment, because that's what we see on the media. We see the white podcast like host with all of the grand things, they like Apple products, all of that. And then Bianca asked me, like, but why do we need all of that? We just need a phone and record, because what's the purpose of us like having this podcast is to actually share our truth, to put us, our voices, collective voices, on the internet. And we can do that with our phone, whether or not that's a phone that we buy at PIP for 100 rand or 200 rand, doesn't matter, because what's most important is for us to share our Black Queer joy and to create a community that doesn't just stay with us but actually reach the entire South Africa, the entire world. So that's the disclaimer, is that we're not perfect. This is our first time doing this, and we're going to do it good. And if we fuck up, we're going to fuck up big. Yes. So yeah, I had a question, but then come on, you can start.
I really liked what you said, and you know, for me, what is sticking with me is something that you said, and it's something that Bianca also alluded to, the fact that Imbawula is not just a podcast, it's a movement. Yes. So I know Merique always reminds us as a team that Imbawula is a collective, and it includes you, the audience, and the things and the people that surround us. And I think that's why that issue around accessibility is really important, because years after Imbawula does its things and we are able to penetrate throughout the digital space, the same way the negative narratives about queer people penetrate the digital space and cross borders, it needs to also be a representation of what is possible. So I like the idea that we're talking about accessibility and about using what we have within our realm. When it comes to, like you said, you know, if you're getting 100 rand phone, if it's got a recorder, you are a podcaster, right? Yes. You are part of the Imbawula movement. You're part of the collective, right? And from what I've heard so far, I don't think we imagine our collective as just being what's around us, right? We've mentioned moving across borders. And so in the current sort of, socio-political state of the world, or even closer to home, South Africa, what is Imbawula's role? How do we imagine ourselves still activisting, but still also sticking to the thing that beats inside, that is, we want to make sure that we show Black queer joy. And that's a question I'm putting out to us. I'm putting out to the rest of the team that maybe isn't here, but it will be another episode, but also to the Imbawula collective. How do we do that? Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, how do we remain a moment?
Yeah, how do we? So things, I came across a quote, Mangwane, that said something along the lines of, peace isn't always possible. It's not always a choice. And it was in reference to Gaza and Palestine. So some things are just bleak. You can't outjoy the bleakness of our killings and the sufferings that we have. But there's also power in the fact that we want to show Black queer joy. So how does Imbawula make sure that, I think the way you described it is, we don't want to be in a toxic bubble. So, and it's more of an open-ended question. I'm not hoping for an answer now, but it's also something I'm like, I think we need to think about that we don't.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
I love the fact that I love the quote that says peace is not always possible.
Yeah.
It takes us back to the South African legislature with regards to queer rights and everything. Not necessarily the South African legislature, but the world's legislature. Every year we are celebrating a new country, legalizing queer marriages and all that. And recently, I think the Pope Francis, yes, legalized the queer marriages in the Catholic Church. But then,
I didn't know that.
yes, the Pope blessed the queer marriages and stuff. But South Africa legalized queer marriages years ago, decades ago, and then a few weeks ago, the former president, who is also running for elections under Kgotso, something. Yeah, also highlighted in his manifesto that one of the objectives will be to illegalize queer marriages because of whatsoever. So the fight is going back and forth. Just when he said we have accomplished something and we are moving and we are achieving something, we are taken back 2 steps back because this person was once a president of the country. And what does that mean to us as South Africa? And with the upcoming elections, what does that mean for us as the queer community? Because we know that politicians will target the queer community, will target the marginalized and say that we support you, this and this and that. And then after after elections, boom, just like that. It's a continuous back and forth, more like a boomerang. But how do we make sure that the fire Imbawula never dies is to teach others. This podcast will be in the internet for the next 10 years, and the next generation will still find there. They will learn from it. So this was a situation in 2024, and they can build on that because Imbawula is a movement. Everyone is part of Imbawula.
So the thing that how I describe the theme for this podcast or for this season, not particularly the podcast, is that we are focusing on Black queer joy, we are consciously deciding to focus on it. This is not us creating a toxic bubble saying that we're so Lulu, it's just we're choosing the Lulu-ness. So in this bubble, it's just Black queer joy. and nothing else. That's not the way to live. That's not how we are wired as human. We are complex complex beings. We can be happy, sad, pissed, like horny all at the same time. And we want that. We want you to actually like feel all of those feelings. But like we said earlier in this podcast, it's difficult for us to actually consciously like feel joy for whatever reason. So our purpose right now was to, but in this moment, is to like actually highlight joy, to like kind of force people to see the good in themselves. But we are releasing this podcast at a very important time for our country. So we can't just focus on like the joys. Yes, right now, where people have the right to marry. And we have the Incomes Bill that was passed, that we have joyful moments, but it's being threatened by our politicians. Our existence to them is still like a bargaining, something for them to like use when they want something and take away when they're not getting something. So we want people to actually think about that as well. So it's like a balancing, it's like a give and a take, I think.
Oh, just in conclusion, just a quick question for the four of us. If we were to use one word to define queer joy, what would it be? Without thinking, Merique?
Without thinking, why the hell did I just go to
One word.
Just one word.
I think backward.
Yeah, sorry people, I am not a I am a fake. I don't know why they just popped up.
Wow. Okay.
Boobs. Okay. Yeah.
For me, the word that pops up is movement. Definitely.
Clarity orgasmic.
One word, Kamo.
They came at the same time.
You guys are making me
Orgasmic
Oh,
clarity.
no.
With a hyphen in the
Kamo said orgasmic.
One way to describe queer joy for me, it'll be freedom. You know, as Bianca mentioned in the beginning of this movement, we went to, is it Ezekiel, the slave lodge?
Yes.
Yes. There was a quote that stood out for me. That's a quote by Nelly M. Oopsie. Nelson Mandela. I'm sorry, I'm so used to that. That's a quote by.
I like Nelly M.
Okay, that's a quote by Nelly M that says, "For to be free is not only to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." Which is what has been the topic around the gender diverse and trans people, that we are legal in a way, but we are still not, I don't know, like included in the society. We are still sidelined. We are still called people of the community. We are still called rainbow people. Like, why are we separated?
The alphabet gang.
The alphabet gang, you know, all those names. Why are we separated from all other people? You know, if you see a cisgender man, it's just a human being. You see a cisgender woman, it's just a human being. But then why do we have to be the alphabet gang? Why do we have to be sidelined? I've also realized in also organization or political parties, they have created a queer desk. Why? Why do queer people have to have like their own is it coalition?
I mean, basically, like, why, like, do they move the protection or, like, specific focus on queerness to a corner? Why is it part of the collective, like, decision making? So why is it, like, in the corner there, you have a desk there, and then we will have the main table to discuss the most serious issues? Like, that's the feeling that we get, and I think we can explore that later on in the podcast. There's our different perspectives on it. Someone might agree with us having that specific representation in the decision making process. Yeah.
Okay, so that's just a thought for you to take home. Let's say it's a homework for you to just think about it and tell us what you think. Don't forget to follow us on our social media. On Facebook, we are Imbawula Podcast, TikTok, Imbawula Podcast, Instagram, Imbawula Podcast, and on X/Twitter, we are Imbawula Podcast.
Imbawula.